Hello, everybody. Welcome back. So that was a lot of information on terrestrial biomes. Get up and stretch a little while I introduce you to the next unit. While you're stretching, I want you to think of at least 3 things you got from the terrestrial biome presentation and study tip presentation. 3 things that you got out of that. So we're going to only spend a few minutes on this, and you're going to have to pause as you go along because there's no reason that I need to be reading slides to you. You're going to cross-check this information with what you already have, and anything that you think that you need to write down in order to remember or to give yourself clues about things, that's what you're going to record in your notes. Some of it is becoming obvious enough where you don't need to write anything down. So the takeaways with aquatic biomes. So terrestrial biomes, we look at the climate and the plants, like what type of plants grow there. Aquatic biomes, we're looking at whether the water is fresh or salty, and how deep the water is it really deep or is it shallow, and how fast the water flows, so the flow rate. So type of water, depth of water, and flow rate of water is what we look at when we're looking at aquatic biomes. And it's really important with aquatic biomes that the water doesn't change because the organisms that live in it are very, very specially and specifically adapted to the biotic and abiotic factors of that biome. And they usually can't survive in something outside that niche of whatever they're used to in the water. Many aquatic habitats have a lot of different animals and plants that are very sensitive to a change in that water type, getting saltier, or a change in the depth, or a change in flow rate. They're very sensitive to that. And of course, like temperature change. So they provide a lot of services. Water is a really important resource for us. So it provides water purification. It helps with storms. When there's storms, the water is running downhill from the storm. We have aquatic biomes that actually slow down that runoff so we don't get as much flooding. And different water bodies are really important for breeding grounds for fish and birds and other animals. And then, of course, humans love the water. Makes us feel good. So this is topic 1.3 for the College Board AP curriculum, and there are 3 essential knowledge points. The first one is in the box that we're going to go over, which are the freshwater biomes, and then we have marine biomes, and then a little more about the distribution of water on planet Earth. So let's start with the freshwater biomes. These include streams, rivers, lakes, ponds, and freshwater wetlands. These are freshwater, so they have very low salinity. So this is the part where I'm no longer going to read to you. You're going to pause as needed and ask yourself, do I know this already? So you're going to pause, you're going to read, and then you're going to move on. Now, when we're looking at this picture, this is a very large stream. It probably is close enough where maybe it's called a river because of the size. I would call something like this a river because we've got a lot of water flowing through here and it's moving rather quickly and there's a lot of turbulence, and we have the sections in the channel. So we have like a channel and we have this turbulent riffle area here, which is much bigger than riffles. These are massive rocks. This actually really mixes the oxygen into the water. This water is probably a lot cooler than other water, which fish love, and has a lot more oxygen in it because it's turbulent and it's moving around. It's moving around. You're going to pause this and you're going to read this information to yourself after I explain this. This term is riparian. The riparian zone is all this on the edges of a stream, a river, a lake, a pond, a wetland. This is the part where water runs downhill from like the mountains and it gets slowed down by the soil and all the vegetation in it. Riparian zones are incredibly important for managing the potential natural disasters that could happen in a body of water. And then you've probably learned about rivers and tributaries, the mouth of the river banks. This is just a reminder of some of the stuff that you should have learned in middle school. So pause as you need, read this information to remind yourself and review the parts of rivers and river anatomy. And then we have our lakes and ponds. So just a little information, lakes and ponds are the water that does not flow. We're not going from point A to point B. This water is more standing, the standing water. And we have zones in here, and they are pronounced the littoral zone, which is like shallow of soil and water. We have the limnetic zone, which is open water. We have, this is not a zone, but phytoplankton is like the floating algae, really important. And then we have the profundal zone. Now look where the profundal zone is. So it's definitely going to be where the sunlight doesn't reach, so plants can't grow anymore. And the benthic zone, benthic, where the mud accumulates at like the bottom of a lake or pond. Lots of nurseries can be in the benthic zone and also in the littoral zone. Okay, so now you're looking at the picture. You should be testing yourself on what makes one zone different from the next. Remember the order of the zones. Test yourself, then pause, then check your notes and see how you did. Describe each zone. Remember, this is a lake or a pond, which is standing water. Okay, now lakes also go through kind of like a life cycle. Most lakes start out as oligotrophic. And oligotrophic is what we would call probably the younger lake because there's not as much stuff in it, like sediment and organic material to put the nutrients in there. We don't have the bottom of our food chain really well established yet. If we don't have our plants really well established yet, which need those nutrients to run off from the land, then we're not going to have the rest of the food chain in there. So oligotrophic lakes are the ones that you love to swim in and you love to like put your feet in. Oligotrophic lakes are going to be very clear. They don't have a lot of sediment in them. Mesotrophic is like in between. So we're beginning to grow a little more plants. I don't have a picture of that one, but I do have a picture of the later stage, the older, more established lake or pond, and that's eutrophic. And eutrophic is where we have a lot of productivity, lots of plants. You don't want to go swimming in there because it's also pretty, like you can't see through it. So it has high, what we call sediment load or turbidity. And this actually is a great eutrophic, a great location for fishing, for any kind of fish that can have everything at the bottom of their food chain. Then we have freshwater wetlands. I'm not going to read you this stuff. And the pictures of the freshwater wetlands are here. See what notes you have about wetlands, but wetlands are incredibly important. We actually build man-made wetlands every time we build a stormwater pond, if we can now. We'll put a couple plants in there that we think will help establish something similar to a wetland if we know that the water can be standing in there over longer periods of time. Wetlands are very, very productive ecosystems, and we'll talk more about them another time. So here is the services, which are, what I mean by services is ecosystem services of wetlands. So go ahead and pause and read that to yourself. Wetlands are really, really good for the ecosystem and for the economy. Okay, so moving on to our second essential knowledge point. You have to understand that marine biomes are the ones with salt water, and the algae in them provides a whole lot of the oxygen for the planet. It's because there's so much marine biomes. There are a lot of them. We'll talk about that another time too. So a salt marsh is like all along like estuaries. So salt marsh is definitely going to have not trees in it, but a lot of vegetation in it, similar to a wetland, but it's going to be along the coast of an estuary or along the coastline. It's definitely going to be more salty, and it's definitely going to be in those temperature or temperate climate zones. So we have a lot of salt marshes in like the Chesapeake Bay. So it's usually part of the bay, and salt marshes or estuaries are the most productive biomes, saltwater marine biomes in the world. Estuaries are incredibly, incredibly productive. And productive means like plants grow really well in there. Plants grow really, really well in there. That's what productivity means. You'll learn a whole lot more about that soon. Okay, so you read this to yourself and then move on. read this to yourself. It's just more pictures, really. That's why I wanted to show you. And then we have the mangrove swamps. So we don't have any of those locally. So they're going to be, we have them also along coastlines. And I've actually been to them and have gone snorkeling in them. Really, really cool. We don't live in a tropical or subtropical area. That's really the only reason we don't have them near us, because it's the same conditions otherwise. These things are great. If there's a hurricane that brings in storm surge and flooding, mangrove swamps are really great in slowing down that water by capturing it and not allowing it to inundate the coastline and where people live and flood it. So we love our mangrove swamps for those ecosystem services. And we also love them because lots of animals and lots of diversity is protected in here. So it provides habitat for our biodiversity on the planet. Then we have our intertidal zones. You can read this to yourself and then move on. Just look where they are. Our coral reefs, we'll be talking about those more, and we're losing a lot of our coral reefs because of something called coral bleaching, where the algae inside all of the coral actually dies. And we'll talk about what is triggering all of that, just not today. And then we have our open ocean. In our open ocean, we have different zones, just like you do in a lake or in a pond. So we have the open deep ocean, which sunlight can't get to the bottom, and all the productivity is only going to be in the very shallow zone. We have the photic zone that I'm talking about that can happen all across the open ocean, all the way to, wherever the tide goes. The aphotic zone, is where the water doesn't get as much sunlight for photosynthesis. So again, we're talking about plants, the bottom of the food chain, productivity. And then we have chemosynthesis that occurs, where bacteria in the ocean actually don't use photosynthesis. They use methane and hydrogen sulfide. We'll talk about those soon. We just can't do it all in one day. So you're getting introduced to it. Okay, remember I told you about the importance of algae? So if you look at the chart down here, first of all, this is just a close-up of what algae might look like. But if you look at the chart here, oxygen producers for the planet, and big blue is marine organisms, specifically plants. And the ones that are in that photic zone on the top are the ones that are photosynthesizing, like the picture over here. And when they photosynthesize, they produce oxygen that goes into our atmosphere. And notice they use carbon dioxide from the atmosphere in order to photosynthesize. You'll learn a lot about photosynthesis soon. Can't do it all in one day. The last thing I'm going to show you is about the global distribution of our marine natural resources. So it's all about fish. It's all about the things that we like to use, humans like to use. So I'm not going to read this slide to you. You're going to pause and read it yourself, but go ahead and look at the top. So natural resources could be affected, like with the fish. We're going to use fish for an example. Fish could be affected if there's a change in salinity, depth, turbidity, nutrient availability, and temperature. And I'm going to pop up some things that you'll pause and look up on your own. I think it's pretty obvious to understand, but these are like herbivores you're familiar with, and herbivores have a salinity preference. They like, they like to be in fresh water more than they like to be in marine water. Then we have our fish over here, and we have fish that like to change, they compete in their resources. We've already learned about like competitive exclusion. They find their own little niches, okay? But what's important is they also have a niche where they might prefer to be in the deep or in, medium depth. And you may have heard of some of those fish. So that's resource partitioning, if you recall, that you learned about 2 class periods ago. And then freshwater fish can't handle turbidity. Turbidity is just too much cloudiness and sediment and junk floating in the water column. It's different when it's sitting at the bottom and they can lay some of their eggs, but turbidity, floaty, cloudy water puts a lot of stress on the fish. So turbidity is right there. So I'm trying to make the point about how the factors that define a body of water actually affect the life in that water. And last but not least, just so you start really getting this, I'm showing you temperatures. So different types of fish prefer to live or to swim around in certain temperatures. And I know you've heard of a lot of these, but if the temperature of the water in one location is outside this range, you're probably not going to find the walleye within this range. So you might need to go to cooler water if the water that you're fishing in, you're looking for walleye. You want it to be that temperature. So our natural resources, things that we like fish and the use of water, we do have to consider those things that affect it. Okay, so remember, you've learned about terrestrial and aquatic biomes, and you need to know the differences between each and how we classify them. All right, so that's it for aquatic ecosystems, and this is a wrap, and we're just going to go on to the next thing. So now you should understand how differences in abiotic and biotic conditions help us describe a biome. These conditions also help us understand why different species and producers and consumers, including commercially important plants and trees and species and fish and shellfish, live in different regions of the world. All right, that's it for us. This is Mrs. Gabriel signing out.